When was the turning point? When did we go from being born a citizen to an employee? February 21st, 1871. Congress passes a law that conspiracy theorists claim turned America into a corporation. But what really happened that day tells a different story, one that's actually more disturbing than fiction. The District of Columbia Organic Act wasn't about transforming America. It was about cleaning up the mess that was Washington, D.C. 3 separate jurisdictions, Washington City, Georgetown, and Washington County, merged into one municipal government. But here's the plot twist conspiracy theorists missed. This law was so unremarkable, Congress repealed it just 3 years later in 1874. If this was some grand corporate takeover, they did a pretty terrible job making it permanent. So if 1871 wasn't the day America became a corporation, when did corporate power really start taking over? The answer is both more complex and more documented than any conspiracy theory. How after the Civil War, America was ruined financially and owed debt to European banks, especially Rothschild. How America couldn't pay its debt, so it was restructured. While people argue about the Act of 1871, the real corporate takeover was happening right in front of everyone's eyes. It wasn't a secret law. It was broad daylight business. Meet the Gilded Age, when America's economy exploded, and with it, corporate power. Between 1870 and 1900, industrial production increased by 300%. But here's what that really meant. A handful of men controlled entire industries. John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil controlled 90% of America's oil refining by 1880. Andrew Carnegie dominated steel. J.P. Morgan controlled the railroads. These weren't shadowy conspirators. They were celebrated business titans who operated completely legally in the system they were in. By 1890, even Congress couldn't ignore what was happening. Senator John Sherman declared,
"If we will not endure..."
The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was supposed to break up these monopolies. For a moment, it looked like democracy might fight back against corporate power. But here's where it gets interesting. The same Supreme Court that was supposed to enforce antitrust laws started carving out exceptions. In 1895, the court ruled that manufacturing wasn't commerce, so most monopolies, the law designed to stop corporate concentration, became nearly useless. The E.C. NICO case, 1895, severely weakened the Sherman Act by ruling that manufacturing was not interstate commerce. This legal interpretation allowed monopolies to continue growing until the Progressive Era reforms. What made these monopolies so powerful wasn't secret laws, it was a legal innovation called the trust, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. Here's how it worked. Instead of one company owning everything, stockholders would transfer their shares to a board of trustees. Legally, these were separate companies. Practically, they operated as one massive monopoly. The Standard Oil Trust controlled over 40 separate corporations this way. By 1940, there were over 300 major trusts controlling American industry. These weren't shadowy conspiracies. They were openly traded on stock exchanges, reported in newspapers, celebrated by investors. The trust system was a legal mechanism that allowed effective monopolization while technically maintaining separate corporate entities. This documented practice led to the term trust busting during the Progressive Era. But the trusts were just the beginning. The real game changer came from an unlikely source, the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was written to protect freed slaves after the Civil War. It says no state can deny any person equal protection under the law. Simple enough, right? Except corporate lawyers argued that corporations were persons too. And incredibly, the courts agreed. Between 1868 and 1912, the 14th Amendment was cited 19 times by the Supreme Court to protect African Americans' rights. It was cited 288 times to protect corporate rights. More than 100 years later, that's still the case. Let's see how corporate power really infiltrated government. Let's start with America's first major corporate scandal, and it happened just 1 year after the Act of 1871. The Credit Mobilier scandal had everything: a fake company, inflated government contracts, and congressmen getting rich off taxpayer money. Here's the scheme. The Union Pacific Railroad created a construction company called Credit Mobilier. Then they gave Credit Mobilier, or themselves, massively overpriced contracts to build the Transcontinental Railroad, contracts paid for with government money. The brilliant part? They sold discounted shares in credit mobilier to key congressmen and government officials. So the same people who were supposed to oversee the railroad contracts were getting rich from the inflated prices. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? When it all came out in 1872, it destroyed careers and showed Americans something chilling. Corporations didn't need to secretly take over the government. They could just buy the people running it. America's first major scandal seems common practice today, so much so that it is even defended by those who it's being taken from. That was just the warm-up act. The real show started in 1873, when America learned what happens when you let financial speculation run wild. September 18, 1873. J. Cook and Company, one of America's most respected banks, suddenly declared bankruptcy. Within days, the stock exchange shut down for 10 days, something that had never happened before. What followed was a 6-year depression. Here's the kicker. The government's response was to bail out the banks while letting millions of workers suffer. The pattern was set 135 years before 2008. When banks fail, taxpayers pay. When workers lose their jobs, they're on their own. And we keep letting it happen. What do they say about the definition of insanity? One has to ask the question, do we really have unalienable rights, or are we corporate citizens that have been granted privileges? Corporate citizens have granted privileges revocable at will. The Constitution became a document of endless interpretations and selective context. By 1907, one man had become more powerful than the U.S. government itself, and he proved it during the panic. That year in October, banks were failing, the stock market was crashing, and the U.S. Treasury was nearly empty. President Theodore Roosevelt, the great trust buster, had to do something unprecedented. He called J.P. Morgan. Morgan didn't just help, he took control. He locked the country's top bankers in his private library and wouldn't let them leave until they agreed to his bailout plan. Think about that. A private citizen held the financial leaders of America hostage in his own home to save the economy, a problem that was created by another corporate giant. Morgan's plan stopped the panic. Some deemed him a patriot. To those who rigidly examined his actions, he was a monster who fed off the demise of economic destruction. But it also demonstrated something terrifying. America's financial system depended entirely on the one man, a man who wound up creating a dynasty of all this chaos and ruling the financial world. The Panic of 1907 scared everyone, politicians, bankers, and the public. The solution? Create the Federal Reserve in 1913. Bankers wanted private control of money creation. Populists wanted government control. What they got was complicated. Here's how it actually works. The Federal Reserve has 12 regional banks that are technically owned by private member banks. But the Board of Governors, the people who make the big decisions, are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. So is it public or private? It's both. The regional Fed banks are private institutions that make profits for their member banks, but monetary policy is set by government appointees. In other words, the originator of the money is private, and the ones who decide how to use it are politicians. It's neither fully democratic nor fully corporate. We are at the mercy of our representatives, that they will not only responsibly use the money but hold others accountable. Are there any in office now you trust enough to not be tempted and use funds appropriately? Many wonder what would happen if both structures had an aligned interest that didn't benefit you. Now, to Washington, D.C., it was established as a federal district in 1790 under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which grants Congress exclusive jurisdiction over a federal district. The City of London is a historic financial center within London, England, and Vatican City is an independent city-state established in 1929. People speculate of control among these three entities, but it is that speculation. If you'd like me to do an independent video on this topic, leave a comment below. So, now we fast forward to 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, 5-star general, war hero, Republican president, was about to leave office. His farewell address contained a warning that still echoes today.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
This wasn't some conspiracy theorist. This was the man who led D-Day warning America about the disastrous rise of misplaced power. What did he see? Eisenhower watched defense contractors become dependent on government contracts, while Pentagon officials planned their post-retirement careers at those same companies. The result? A system where war became profitable and peace became expensive. Eisenhower coined the term military-industrial complex after witnessing the growth of defense contractors during the Cold War. Defense spending increased from $13.7 billion in 1950 to $46.6 billion in 1960, creating powerful industries dependent on military contracts. Today, Eisenhower's worst fears have been realized. But you don't need conspiracy theories to see it, just look at the numbers. Corporate lobbying is around $3.5 billion annually. That's nearly $7 million for every member of Congress, every single year. But the real action happens in the revolving door. Between 2009 and 2020, 75% of former congressional members became lobbyists. FDA officials become pharmaceutical executives. EPA administrators join chemical companies. Treasury secretaries move to Wall Street banks. It's not corruption. It's the career path. Citizens United v. FEC, 2010, removed limits on corporate political spending, calling it free speech. The result? In the 2020 election cycle, corporate PACs and dark money groups spent over $14 billion influencing elections. This is well documented. The Center for Responsive Politics tracks these movements, showing how regulatory agencies are often run by former industry executives who return to industry positions after government service. Want to see corporate power in action? Look at who pays taxes in America. In 1952, corporate taxes made up 32% of federal revenue. By 2020, just 10%. Meanwhile, individual income taxes and payroll taxes now fund 83% of the federal government. Amazon paid zero federal income tax in 2018 despite $11 billion in profits. General Electric got tax refunds while making billions. It's not illegal. It's the tax code working exactly as corporate lobbyists designed it. The average American pays about 13% of their income in federal taxes. The effective corporate tax rate, about 11%. Corporations use the infrastructure, legal system, and military protection that taxes fund, but individual citizens carry most of the cost. But nothing demonstrates corporate power like the 2008 financial crisis. Here's what happened when the banks that caused the crisis needed saving. Total bailouts: $4.4 trillion in loans, guarantees, and direct aid to financial institutions. Meanwhile, 10 million Americans lost their homes to foreclosure. The message was clear: banks were too big to fail, but homeowners were small enough to sacrifice. Not a single major banking executive went to prison, but over 8 million Americans lost their jobs. The Federal Reserve pumped trillions into bank reserves, while unemployment benefits were cut due to budget concerns. The Federal Reserve's crisis response included $1.75 trillion in asset purchases and near zero interest rates that primarily benefited financial institutions. Meanwhile, foreclosure prevention programs like HARP helped fewer than 4 million homeowners out of the 10+ million who lost their homes. The 2008 crisis revealed something deeper: regulatory capture. It's when the agencies supposed to regulate industries are run by the industries themselves. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which regulates derivatives, former Wall Street executives, the Federal Communications Commission, telecom industry veterans, the Environmental Protection Agency as of 2025, run by a former coal lobbyist. It's not a conspiracy, it's a system. Industry writes the regulations, government implements them, and regulators get rewarded with lucrative private sector jobs. The fox isn't guarding the henhouse. The fox is designing the henhouse. Birth certificates are for vital records, right? There's a speculation that it is treated as a securitized bond, traded as financial instruments. Social security numbers were created for retirement benefits. But if we really were born into a corporation, it can also be used to identify your commodities. The Federal Reserve prints dollars backed by debt. Citizens are endlessly taxed to repay creditors. The military doesn't just defend freedom, it defends the corporate balance sheet. All this suggests we were born into a corporate trust designed for debt repayment. Your taxes, your labor, your identity equals collateral. Your country equals corporate asset. What do you think?